I'd like to tell a story this morning, one that most of you are already familiar with to some degree. The story is mythic and epic and deeply personal. It's the story of Achilles, a mighty Greek warrior who fought in the Trojan War and was the hero of Homer's The Iliad. For me, it's a story that makes clear how the choices in life that dangle before us, these choices are always fraught with fear and hope. The story of Achilles seems to say that, well, yes, life is stressful. How could it be otherwise? There are so many choices, and all of them seem like moving targets. There's so many variables that come into play, one can go nuts trying to figure out how we ought to live, what matters most to us, what do we want out of life, what holds meaning for us. To complicate matters right from the beginning, Achilles is the son of a mortal father and immortal mother. The mix of divine and human always muddle things, yet remains a theme in many cultures throughout time. After all, the story of Jesus begins with the virgin birth, a mortal woman impregnated by a deity. Taken literally, we may easily reject such myth, but someone like Ralph Waldo Emerson comes along and is able to lift poetically the intent of the story, namely that Jesus reflected the divine in each and every one of us mortals. In other words, we have the capacity to rise above the selfish habits that permeate human beings everywhere by tapping the transcendent elements that are also a part of our makeup. The African-American poet Nikki Giovanni captures the essence of our mixture, this mixture of human and divine, when she says, "We are better than we think and not quite what we want to be." Obviously, it's no easy matter figuring out what we really want out of life. Achilles' mother, the immortal parent, desperately wants to make her son immortal as well. And if I were to translate this desire into modern sensibilities, I think I would use the word safe. Every mother, every father has but one wish, not exactly for their children to be immortal, they just want their children not to be harmed in any way. Keep them safe. So the mom, named Thetis, held young Achilles by the heel and dipped him into the river Styx. Everything the sacred water touches becomes invulnerable. But the heel, because she held him thus, the heel remained dry and therefore unprotected. When Achilles was a boy, there was a seer, of course, roaming around town. This was ancient Greece after all, and the story would not be complete without a prophecy delivered from the mouth of a seer. And he predicted that the city of Troy could not be taken without the help of Achilles. Imagine a mother hearing this prophecy. Thetis, being immortal, also knew a few things about the future. For example, she knew that if the forecast were true, if Achilles ended up going to Troy, he would die an early death. So she sent him away to a noble court in another region of the land and disguised Achilles as a young girl. This takes me back to my own draft-dodging days during Vietnam. Like Thetis, we tried to beat the system. Disguises would not have worked well in the 60s, but many draftees suddenly adopted a gay lifestyle or pursued mental instability. Some went to divinity school. Achilles' disguise as a young maiden was busted by Odysseus, who at this point acted like a recruiting sergeant. He gathered together the young women in town and displayed for their pleasure jewelry and women's finery. But mixed in with the women's stuff, Odysseus also displayed military arms and armor, observing how the so-called maiden Achilles was fascinated by the swords and shields. Now, this part of the story upsets every feminist vying for gender neutrality. You may have heard the NPR report earlier this week on how Sweden has taken an almost fanatical approach to gender neutrality. In an effort to wipe out stereotypes, advertisers now can only display little girls with guns and little boys playing with dolls. If you show any hint of a sport or a toy reflecting traditional sexual traits of masculinity or femininity, you will be penalized. I don't know if you can even use the word penalized. There's even a commission that oversees all advertisements and takes complaints from citizens who might feel offended if they saw, for example, an ad featuring a boy kicking a soccer ball. Well, obviously, Homer was neither Swedish nor cared much about breaking gender stereotypes. Achilles' feminine disguise came undone when his masculine self could not resist the lure of battle paraphernalia. Achilles went willingly with Odysseus to Troy, where he distinguished himself as an undefeatable warrior. At one point, he captured 23 towns in Trojan territory, including one town where he took a woman named Briseis as his war prize. But later on, Agamemnon, leader of the Greeks, was forced by an oracle of Apollo to give up his own war prize and took Briseis away from Achilles as compensation for his loss. Well, Achilles became so enraged that he refused to fight for the Greeks any further. He left the battlefield and the war, and things started going really badly for the Greeks. Now, Achilles was quite a ladies' man. And when he left the battlefield, he actually fell in love with a woman, made a nice home for both of them, and really enjoyed not only her company and the company of friends, but he had an especially close relationship with his father, who was the mortal parent in this family. All the while, the Greeks were imploring him to return because he was the greatest warrior ever known. He was fated, they say, to come and help us defeat Troy. Well, Achilles knew how the story would end if he returned to fight. He was indeed fated to die before the war ended. So he's sitting on this proverbial horn of a dilemma. Should he fulfill his semi-divine potential as a warrior and die young, yet adored by all, personifying a complete and utterly successful heroic life, though shortened? Or does he enjoy the happiness of home for many years to come? As he reflects on the choice before him, weighing the costs and rewards of each scenario, Homer compresses all the tragic implications of this dilemma into one single line. Achilles says, "And yet I must choose." In case you've forgotten what Achilles ultimately decided, he returned to battle, mainly to avenge the death of his friend. He continued fighting heroically, killing many Trojans and their allies. But his days were numbered, and an arrow found its way and wounded Achilles in the heel. Soon thereafter, he died of that wound. We can never fully protect our children.